Today's Real Talks video unofficially brought to you by Jeffrey Bezos. Jeffrey, if you're watching, my man, help a brother out financially. What's up, fam and cheese? So some of you may have just learned I am currently working for Amazon in this season. And if you're part of my close circle, you already know that this drives me kind of nuts. After all, I am a punk soul and I'm working for the man. But alas, this is where we find ourselves in this season. And we're making the most of it. We're having some fun with it. One of the best things about it is that it's Amazon Flex. And it leaves me flexible enough to do things like this video. You do this long enough, you start to learn the trade. Ooh-wee, I've been excited to drop this bad boy on you. It's a Real Talks video that I think I'm going to title, It's Both of Those Things. If you're new to my Real Talk series, this is where I kind of break down in my own language these stories from scripture, and I try to give us ways that we can apply these to our life. And today I'm coming at you with two, and this honestly, guys, has potential to really change, hopefully for the better, some of the ways that you may read scripture or even hear others quote it. As usual, we're going to talk about Jesus and a couple of the parables that he gave us while he was here, and hopefully it may serve as a way of illuminating what he was really after in them. This is not some secret thing that only I know, just something that I hope will be helpful. Before we get into the meat of this video, just right quick, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel. My channel statistics show me that about 60% of the people that watch my videos are not subscribed. Crazy. Actually, it's not that crazy. I mean, I watch channels and videos that I like, but I don't subscribe to. So quickly, I'll share my purpose with this channel is to be a resource to the church and a witness, a good witness, hopefully, to the unbeliever. I seek to do this in a couple ways. One is to empower the voices of unseen and unheard people by giving them a platform. And two is to unite niche groups under one name here by talking about niche things, like even today's topic. If you like what I'm here to do and want to support this going forward, that would mean the world to me. The best way to do so is to comment for now, subscribe for the journey, or leave a like or a dislike on this video, either one. And if you're really feeling generous, sharing it with the people you know and love, pretty cool. Regardless, to whatever extent that you support this channel, even if it's just by giving this video a watch, I thank you in advance. So, let's get back into it. So, to get to the heart of what I'm talking about, let's go to one of the most used passages of scripture. It's the parable of the prodigal son. The story's found in Luke 15, verses 11 through 32. So the story centers on two brothers. One stays home and is the older brother, one leaves home as the younger brother, the prodigal son. The prodigal son basically asks his father to give his inheritance, his share of the inheritance in advance. He goes off and squanders it in some foreign land and then is like, oh shoot, I want to go back to my dad. And when he comes back, he's thinking that he's going to approach his father as a servant and just despair and like take me at all costs. And yet the father figure comes up and embraces him and accepts him right back into the home. Just even when he was a far way off, he didn't even have a chance to explain himself. And this story actually didn't stop there. It goes on to talk about the dynamic of the older son, the one who stayed, and was disappointed at his father's reaction to the prodigal coming home because he had been there all along. He was low-key kind of jealous, big mad. Most people end up solely focusing on that story of the prodigal. If they address the older brother, it's to say, let's not have this religious spirit, that sort of thing, but we don't spend as much time on it. So you may already see where I'm going with this video when I tell you the father's heart is just as clearly presented in both. To cut right to the chase, I think when we put so much focus on the story of the prodigal, most people, I'm swatting at mosquitoes as I go. The prodigal allows us to focus on themes of grace and of us coming back and the Father accepting us wholeheartedly, even when we've been so far off, which that speaks to me. I know I've been very far off. I think the tendency that can be read into then is, okay, so if this is the Father's response, should we then be prodigals? Are we supposed to just accept our role as the prodigal? When asked this question, some will take it a bit farther and say, well, no, sometimes we find ourselves in the role of the older brother, and we have to allow ourselves to be more accepting and happy when one sinner returns back to the fold of God, even if it doesn't look like what we would prefer it to look like. I'm not the first person to say this, but I want to say it for whoever's hearing this for the first time. There are no perfect characters in this story aside from the Father. In other words, this story is meant to kind of almost leave us wanting, to not leave us satisfied with it. It's because in this story, we're not given a brother figure who does the right thing or a perfect brother figure. Some people may respond, yes, we're never going to be the perfect brother figure, but we are called to point to the perfect father who has the perfect response, no matter what story you find yourself in, which I think that is a really good narrative. But then my question is, what are we called into? And you've already guessed it, it's both of these things. Are we then called to be prodigals? Are we called to just accept our identity, accept that we're always going to mess up and screw up and go off and squander our Father's wealth, and then have to reapproach him as a prodigal and be accepted in that way? Is that always our story? Is that the best story for us? Well, I'm no infallible source, but I truly believe Jesus would say, by no means. In the same way, we're not called to just stay on the farm and do the right thing with our inheritance, the right thing with our inheritance. Instead, it's both of these things. We're called to be the brother who stays on the farm, who does the right thing in the first place, whatever that looks like. But we're called to be that brother that stays and also rejoices when our brother comes back, no matter what it looks like, because we see ourselves in that prodigal. And guess who models this theoretical, ideological brother that we're wanting in this story better than anyone? Jesus of Nazareth. So in a way, this is Jesus calling us to follow him and how he does things, and he's calling us to both of these things. To take one more example from Scripture and to hopefully further cement this in your kind of Bible reading going forward. You can go a lot of places for this text, but we're going to focus on its presentation in the parable of the Good Samaritan, found also in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. Most of us have heard the parable of the Good Samaritan. If you haven't, please go and read it. It's very important. To really sum it up, a traveler on a path in ancient Israel finds himself woefully beaten up and left to die on the side of a road. And we see that a priest and a Levite of Israel pass him by. And the third character that comes in is a Samaritan, a very hated person for the Jews, comes in, cleans him up, and really shows how to love your neighbor. And that's really what contextualizes this story. Right before Jesus goes into this parable, someone asks him, what is the most important commandment? And just like in the other gospel accounts, Jesus basically affirms via asking a question that it is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Then he goes off on this guy and tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, one of the most quoted texts in all of history, in and out of the church. And usually the predominant thing that I hear surrounding this message is anyone can love like God. God's love is shown through a lot of different vessels, and so don't judge a book by its cover, that sort of thing. The fact that we're called to love, and given the example of one of our assumed enemies in life, Jesus seems to show us that the love of God toward our neighbor is not limited to those who are in the church. And while this seems like some sort of claim to just all-out inclusion, that sort of message, I want to suggest it's both of these things. Have you ever considered why he would use a priest and a Levite as the first two examples that would pass up the person on the side of the road? Most people assume that it's because they are stuck in the religious spirit, that they can't see it, and that the religious spirit is the evil one in this story. These mosquitoes, I'm gonna have no blood. And to be fair, maybe somewhat of that is at play in this text, but you got to consider, who is he talking to here? Jews. His Jewish disciples and all of his Jewish audience would have heard the priest and the Levite and assumed these are people worshiping God right. When Jesus starts telling the parable of the Good Samaritan, notice that he doesn't give any symbol or sign as to what loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength looks like. Instead, he just goes right into an example of how to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that's when it hit me. Oh yeah, Jesus also said in another chapter, another verse, that salvation is from the Jews. Jesus also says in the account of Matthew that he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And then he went on to say that if our righteousness does not exceed that of the scribes and of the Pharisees, that we will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Who are the scribes and the Pharisees? They are much like the people listed as the priest and the Levite. They are the religious elite. So when we see them given as examples, I want to suggest that they are pictures for Jesus of how to love God rightly. So then what are we called to? You get it now. Both of these things. We're called to be like a priest or a Levite that does stop on the side of the road, that does take care of his neighbor as himself, that does show God to the world by caring for the poor and for the hurting. And not just caring for them, but caring for them above and beyond what is expected. Guys, I can't hype up this narrative of a lot of Jesus's teachings enough because I think it's so misunderstood in some of his parables that we just see one and we love it and we reject the other thing that he's trying to say about God's heart for us. So my challenge is this: don't just be a prodigal son and don't just be a stuck-up brother, but be both of these things. I was going to sound all deep there and give my last little closing line, but sometimes it just doesn't work as well as I think. So in essence, if Jesus isn't expecting you to be only a dirty, rotten, prodigal sinner or a completely all holier than thou, all righteous person, why are you expecting yourself to be? And why are you expecting your neighbor to be too? This is a call to let your overemphasis of one and hold on to both of these things. Fam and Cheese, thank you so much for watching this video. It really does just mean the world to me, and I hope you find it meaningful and useful. Like I said at the start of this video, leave me a like, leave me a dislike, either one, comment for now, subscribe for the journey, and until the next time, do everything you do wholeheartedly and with intention. Peace.